So picture the scene. It's the early 1960s, and Pakistan's president, Ayub Khan, is facing an impossible choice. For years, the dispute over Kashmir has been at a stalemate. Diplomacy has gone nowhere, and now he's at a fork in the road. Does he keep talking, or does he use force? That decision would set off a chain of events leading to war, and it all began with this one single problem.
Right, so the core of the issue is this. How on earth could Pakistan get India to the negotiating table over Kashmir? I mean, from India's perspective, the territory was now a done deal, an integral part of their country. After years of talks that went nowhere, it really felt like the diplomatic option was completely off the table.
And that fundamental question, talks or force, was causing a massive split right at the top, inside President Ayub Khan's inner circle. They were really being pulled in two totally different directions. One path was, more of the same diplomacy, which felt pretty hopeless, and the other, direct military action.
And you had two key figures who basically embodied this whole debate. On one side, you've got the super charismatic foreign minister, Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto. He's the hawk, passionately arguing that force is the only language India will ever understand. But on the other side, you've got the army chief, General Musa, the dove, who is slamming on the brakes. He's warning everyone, hey, hold on, the army is just not ready for this. We need a year, maybe even 2 to get prepared.
So just how bad was it on the ground? Why was General Musa so worried? Well, to really get it, you have to look at the grim reality for the Pakistani forces stretched out along that 470-mile ceasefire line in Kashmir.
Yeah, this chart pretty much says it all. It's a really stark picture. The entire defense of this huge front was down to one single unit, the 12th Division, and they were facing an Indian force that was more than 3 times bigger. We're talking about a staggering numerical disadvantage. Just no way around it.
But the problem was so much deeper than just the numbers. You see, the backbone of this 12th Division, 80% of its troops, was something called the Azad Kashmir Regular Force. Now, these weren't soldiers from the regular Pakistan Army. They were so under-resourced that they had to buy their own food and their own uniforms. Can you imagine? On top of that, promotions had been frozen for years. So what happens? Morale just hits rock bottom. It got so bad that soldiers were literally just walking off the job, abandoning their posts. The whole front was falling apart.
So the front line was basically on the verge of collapse. It looked hopeless. But then, just when things seemed their worst, a new commander arrives on the scene, Major General Akhtar Hussain Malik. And his arrival changed everything.
General Malik was like a force of nature. He gets there and immediately starts shaking things up. He gets more money from the top brass, and he gets his men the basics they were desperate for. Free food, new uniforms, better pay, and those promotions they had been waiting years for. But he didn't just fix the supply issues. He totally changed their strategy, from just sitting back and defending to actively going out on aggressive patrols and pushing back against Indian forces. And just like that, morale skyrocketed, and the front line was stable again.
Now, having completely turned his command around, General Malik finds a very powerful friend in the capital, Foreign Minister Bhutto. And this alliance between the ambitious general on the ground and the influential politician was a real game changer. Together, they start making their case directly to President Ayub, arguing that the time for being cautious was over. It was time to go on the offensive.
So, with his top advisors split, what finally pushed President Ayub over the edge? Well, while his own team was debating, a series of political moves coming out of New Delhi started to convince him that the clock was ticking and the chance for a peaceful solution was just evaporating. Let's just walk through this timeline. You can see how India, over almost a decade, just kept tightening its grip. It started with a formal annexation in '57, which kind of went against the whole idea of a future vote. Then, in 1960, they extended their Supreme Court's power over Kashmir. By 1964, things got really serious. Prime Minister Shastri brought in these new constitutional articles that basically gave the Indian president the power to fire Kashmir's local government. In a single move, its autonomy was effectively gone.
And for President Ayub, that 1964 move was it. That was the last straw. From his perspective, India had just slammed the door shut on any real negotiation. And all of a sudden, those aggressive arguments from Bhutto and General Malik didn't just sound persuasive, they sounded necessary. The military option was now front and center.
So the stage was pretty much set for a major clash. And then, in April of 1965, a totally unexpected fight in a completely different part of the subcontinent would become the final, decisive spark.
Way down south, in these marshy salt flats between Pakistan's Sindh province and India's Gujarat, the two armies went at it.
It was a short, really intense fight, and by all accounts, the Pakistani army did incredibly well. They handed the Indian forces a pretty clear defeat.
And it wasn't just a battlefield win. Pakistan actually walked away holding 800 square miles of disputed land. But here's the kicker. The real importance of this little war wasn't the territory. It was the strategic lesson, a deeply flawed lesson, as it turns out, that President Ayub took away from it.
Okay, this is absolutely crucial. During the fighting, India had threatened to escalate things, open up other fronts along the border. But they never did. Now, Ayub Khan saw this not as a sign of restraint, but as a sign of weakness. He convinced himself that if Pakistan started a limited conflict in Kashmir, India would do the same thing again, that they wouldn't have the guts to turn it into a full-scale war. This assumption, born from a victory in a swamp, would turn out to be a catastrophic miscalculation.
So feeling pretty confident after that win in the Kutch and armed with his new and flawed strategic thinking, President Ayub was finally ready to make his move. The plan for that secret operation in Kashmir was put back on the table, and this time, nobody hesitated.
So in May of '65, at the 12 Division headquarters, General Malik lays out his grand plan for a guerrilla war. He promises the president he can get his forces ready to go in just 10 weeks. And Ayub, with all his earlier doubts now gone, replaced by this rush of overconfidence, gives the final go-ahead. The operation was given a code name, Gibraltar.
The strategy itself, when you look at it on paper, was pretty clever. This wasn't supposed to be a straightforward invasion. Step 1, infiltration. Send in guerrilla forces to cause chaos, disrupt supply lines, that sort of thing. Step 2, insurrection. Use that chaos to help the local Kashmiris launch their own armed uprising against India. And only then, Step 3, intervention. That's when the regular Pakistan army would march in to liberate the territory. It was a smart plan, but it was all built on one giant, untested assumption, that the people of Kashmir were actually ready to rise up. And so the die was cast. Thousands of soldiers were getting ready to cross the ceasefire line, all their hopes pinned on a plan that seemed so brilliant. Pakistan was on the verge of launching one of the boldest operations in its entire history. But, as we're about to find out in our next explainer, the messy reality of war is almost always more complicated than the plan.